Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Fluke Best Practices webinar. We're allowing a couple of minutes for everyone to join, and we'll get started shortly. I'm Robin Carr, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Thanks for being here. Hello, everyone. For those of you that are just joining, we're watching the attendee mark tick up. We're going to give everyone just a moment to join. We'll start in another moment. Thank you to those that are just joining. We're giving everybody a few minutes to join. We'll start momentarily. All right. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. Welcome to today's Fluke's Best Practices webinar. I'm Robin Carr, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Thanks for being here. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. If you lose audio or visuals, simply exit GoToWebinar and come back to reset your connection. The chat feature that is available in your GoToWebinar menu panel should be used only for general comments or technical assistance. If you have a question for our speaker today, please enter those in the question section of the GoToWebinar menu panel so that we can present those to our speaker at the end of his presentation. We'll hear from our speaker first and then go directly into our Q&A session and answer as many questions as we can in the time that we have allotted. Our speaker today is Raymond Lattanzio. He is an experienced senior implementation consultant with over 8 years of expertise in deploying and implementing CMMS systems. He has a proven track record of successfully implementing more than 100 e-maintenance CMMS projects. Raymond holds certifications as a project management professional, PMP for those of you that are in the know, and reliability leader, CRL, indicating his proficiency in project management and reliability engineering. He is currently presenting today from Tempe, Arizona, where it's going to be 100 degrees before the day ends. All right, you're here for continuing your success, measuring and maintaining a successful CMMS deployment. Raymond, take it away.
Thank you, Robin. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you may be. Today's presentation is going to be about a CMMS implementation, but what does that look like a little bit further down the line? What we find when a lot of our new customers begin implementing a CMMS project is that there's a lot of energy and a lot of excitement in the beginning of the project. And oftentimes, a lot of customers don't really create too many concrete plans for what the long-term vision of that CMMS implementation is going to be, what year 2 or year 3 or even beyond that is going to look like. And oftentimes what happens is projects can actually start with a lot of momentum in the beginning, and then as time goes on, the excitement and the lack of engagement that occurs later on down the line can actually cause many issues in the project. So we gave a presentation in last spring about how to successfully implement a CMMS project starting out. And we wanted to do this presentation or webinar to show you what continued success looks like past the initial implementation. So we've put together 5 key steps here to continuing your CMMS implementation and making sure that your success is long-term. And the first one here is to identify KPIs and metrics that you want to track within the system. The first step to identifying KPIs and metrics would be to interview and engage key stakeholders. So obviously, there's going to be other individuals, not just the end users of the system that may be interested in getting information out of the database. It's important that you create some KPIs and metrics for not just the users of the system, not just the maintenance managers, not just the the production teams that you're working with, but maybe even senior leadership. So it's really important to engage and also interview all stakeholders to make sure that you're figuring out exactly what kinds of metrics and KPIs they're looking for. This system is not just for the users, but it's for everybody. So we want to make sure that everybody gets an input in regards to what metrics they'd like to be pulled from the system. Once you've defined those specific KPIs and metrics, you'll want to go into the system, whether it's within the actual CMMS system. In eMaint, we have a pretty robust reporting module and a dashboard utility that you can use to create metrics and KPIs, or maybe even extracting data from the system and using another tool like Power BI or something like that to display your metrics and KPIs. You want to make sure that they're defined, and then you can actually use the system to build them. One important thing to note about KPIs and metrics is that a lot of times it's going to be necessary for you to create a baseline in the system. Sometimes in the beginning of a CMMS implementation, I remind customers that if they really are interested in those KPIs and metrics in the very beginning, that there might not be a lot of data for us to use in order to create those metrics and KPIs. So it's really important to make sure that you don't necessarily use the results of the KPIs and metrics too early, because you may not have enough data, or you may not have created a baseline to base your decision making off of. So it's really important to begin to view the metrics and KPIs over maybe not just a month, maybe a few months or even a whole year, to really begin to create your baselines for what your metrics and KPIs are going to be, what the targets for those metrics and KPIs are going to be. So if you don't have any baselines defined at your organization, my first piece of advice there would be to create those baselines. The last thing that you want to take into account when identifying and creating these KPIs and metrics would be to create a communication plan around how to, it's great that we're going to create these so that they can be viewed and we can analyze how our teams are performing within the system, but it's really important to create a communication plan for how you want to get that information out. So push communication would be sending the data out, let's say, or the graphs or the metrics or the KPIs out, let's say on like a monthly email distribution group. Pull communication would be just having the report be in the system when somebody wants to go in there and just pull the information or the metric ad hoc, they're able to do that. And then the last method would be to create some type of information radiator, such as like a central monitor or display within the organization, within the facility, within the maintenance shop, so that users could, if they wanted to see information, just walk past the screen and see how the teams are currently performing. I'm really a big fan of that last method, creating an information radiator or a central display or monitor within the facility to view this information, because one, it puts it into a central area, so that creates accountability, that everybody can see this information. It's public information that's really on display for everybody to see, and it creates a sense of accountability for achieving metrics or achieving the goals that you put forth when you're creating these KPIs. The other reason I like it is that typically the data would be live, right? Those monitors would be pulling the data live from the system so that it would be completely up to date at all times. When you create an email distribution group to send, let's say, graphs or any other metrics or KPIs, oftentimes the data itself within those is only as recent as when those emails were sent. So for instance, if I send an email out this morning at 7 a.m., if somebody doesn't look at that report until, let's say, noon of that same day, that information could already be outdated. It could possibly be missing some information already. So I'm really a big fan of using a central information radiator to display information because of those benefits. It creates that sense of accountability by being in a public place, but it also is going to pull live data from the system. All right, so that was our first item for continuing your implementation, CMMS implementation success, identifying key KPIs and metrics. And I just wanted to go ahead and put here some common KPIs and metrics that I'm sure most all of us are familiar with: MTBF, MTTR, OEE, and work order completion percentage. Just to name a few, those are some common metrics that our customers would be looking to set up within the system. The next key item would be to drive continued adoption of the system. So what I had mentioned this earlier, a lot of times there's excitement and engagement in the very beginning of a CMMS implementation, but oftentimes later on in the implementation, that engagement and that enthusiasm can sometimes track off. So we always want to make sure that we drive continued adoption, whether it's year 1, whether it's year 2, whether it's year 3, or year 4 and beyond. One way to do that is to track system usage. Is labor being charged out to work orders? That's one really common thing that I see with customers where, I'll be looking at their system and kind of taking a look at the work orders within the system, and the vast majority of them, the technicians are not actually keeping track of their labor on their work orders. So that's one really important thing that you can look at to say, are my end users actually using the system? Are they charging labor out to the work orders? Every work order inside of a CMMS system should have a labor charge. There really shouldn't be a reason why that work order, unless it was canceled, wouldn't have a labor charge. Another thing that you want to maybe take a look at would be parts charges. Are parts being charged out to work orders correctly? Or maybe are technicians just grabbing parts off the shelf and just using them without actually charging them out to work orders? So that's another area of the system you'll want to take a look at, just to make sure that technicians are actually using the system appropriately. Are requests being entered into the system, or are people still just sending emails? Are people still just picking up the phone? Are people just still picking up the radio but not actually entering a request within the system to create that record of accountability inside of the CMMS? Are work orders being closed in a timely fashion? This is something that I see quite often, where I'll be working with customers and the work, let's say, was completed last month, and there's still that work order inside the system is still open. So you want to make sure that you stay on top of all these things inside of the CMMS. But even more so, if you're looking inside of the system, these are really good indicators if the system is being used effectively. If these things aren't happening, you might want to take a closer look to see if the system's actually being used appropriately and effectively. The next item here, expanding the usage of the system into new modules, new features, new versions. At least speaking for eMain, it is a cloud-based system. So we're always constantly releasing updates to the system and new features. You want to make sure that you drive continued adoption of the system into these new modules and features, because you want to take advantage of them. You want to take advantage of the fact that they are included in the subscription, and they really expand your usage of the system to drive that adoption, to make sure that you're getting the most value out of your subscription. So expanding your usage into any new modules, features, or versions of the system, I think, is absolutely important. And then lastly, a really good way to drive continued adoption would be to do it, to consider integrations with other systems that you may be using at your organization. So we know that CMMS is probably not the only system that you're using at your organization. I'm sure you're using possibly purchasing system, ERP systems, maybe even production software systems. Integrating the CMMS with other systems is definitely something that can add value and continue to drive adoption in the system in year 2, year 3, and beyond. You may, at least in year 1, want to just get the CMMS up and running itself, and that's definitely how a lot of customers approach their implementation. But once things are running smoothly with the foundational elements of the CMMS, in year 2 or year 3 and beyond, you may want to consider integrations with any other systems that you're using. The next item here would be to create new user onboarding. So I'm a really big proponent of maintaining, training for the software. We want to make sure that education is a key tenet of our usage of the CMMS, not just in year one, but beyond, because we're always constantly going to be getting new people using the system. So creating a new user onboarding for your CMMS is really going to pay dividends for you, because it's going to create engagement, but it's also going to make it so that you potentially, as like the admin of the system or the maintenance manager, aren't constantly having to answer questions about the software. If we create an effective new user onboarding for our end users, it's really going to make it so that it makes our jobs easier in the long run. I did put a note here to optimize the educational resources specific to the individual learner. So this shouldn't come as a shock to anybody, but different people learn in different ways. And especially at Fluke, we have many different options for how people can get trained in the CMMS and in the software. We have videos, we have webinars, we have online documentation, which is essentially an online manual for the system. And we also even offer in-person training, both on-site at your facility, or you can actually come to one of our training centers to get trained in person. It's really important that when you're taking a look at training in the software, you take into account the different ways that different types of learners actually learn. So making sure that if somebody's really needs that hands-on type of learning, that you would consider maybe having them be trained in person. Or if someone really is kind of a quick learner and you feel that they can actually just get by on reading maybe an article and then getting into the system and learning how to do it, the documentation outlet might be a great resource for them. So make sure you optimize the educational resources depending on the type of learner that you have. I did want to also make a note here for continued education for administrators and key users. It's really kind of important, I think, that you attend industry webinars, kind of keeping a pulse on the industry as a whole, both from a reliability perspective, but also a CMMS perspective as well. And then also best practice education in the different industries that you work in can go a long way in making sure that you are implementing or taking advantage or continuing your successful implementation of your CMMS. For instance, maybe some of the metrics or the KPIs specific to your industry have changed. It's really important that you keep a pulse on that stuff so that you could then go to the CMMS and maybe create a new metric or KPI that you're looking to track within the system. All right, next item here for continuing your CMMS implementation success would be key stakeholder communication for senior leadership. So it should come as no surprise that senior leadership is absolutely going to want to make sure that they're getting a return on their investment from the CMMS system that you've implemented. So it's really important to make sure that you quantify some of the improvements that you're seeing with the CMMS system. So as we discussed on our first slide in the webinar, you can use the system to create metrics and KPIs and anything like that. But you really want to make sure that when you take that data, you might want to even extrapolate some type of quantification of what those numbers mean. So for instance, if you reduce downtime on many of your critical assets by maintaining them better within the CMMS, you want to make sure to actually extrapolate what is the actual true dollar cost of that savings. You want to make sure that you quantify those results when presenting them to any senior leadership that you're working with, so that they can actually see a true return on investment, an actual dollar sign for how the system is helping the organization. You may also want to consider doing a quarterly business review with your senior leadership. That's essentially an internal presentation where you can present on a quarterly basis what's been achieved with the system, what that ROI is, what other benefits that the organization is realizing from the system. You want to at least do that quarterly, kind of take a pause and present all the improvements to the senior leadership so that they can really kind of get a pulse on how effective the system is and what those cost savings are looking like. Next, you want to create a business continuity plan. So I really have seen this happen quite often where there's that excitement in the beginning of the implementation. Everyone's super excited about it. And then as time goes on, people drop off the project. You have new team members coming in. You have people maybe completely leaving the organization. Maybe even many of your senior leadership team members have left the organization that initially were your executive sponsor for the implementation. Creating a business continuity plan is really, really critical, because that is actually something that can derail the CMMS project in year 2 or year 3 or beyond. I've seen a lot of success in year 1, and then unfortunately, organizations that don't have a good business continuity plan in place can actually see the CMMS system fail later on down the line. So by creating a business continuity plan, we want to really kind of address a few things here, and making sure that those types of situations do not affect the success of the project. Does the administrator of the system hold all the knowledge? Is all the knowledge about how the system works and how the system is administrated, is all that knowledge being held by one person? Because that's a risk, right? We want to make sure that if that person leaves the organization, we're not in a bad place in terms of getting someone else up to speed in regards to how to best administer the system. You'll want to make sure that you train a co-administrator, someone that works with the administrator pretty closely, that also shares some of that knowledge. That way, you're not putting all the knowledge in the head of just one person. So it's really important that if that person perhaps moved to a different team, or perhaps is no longer involved in the project, or even left the organization completely, we want to make sure we're not in a situation where all the knowledge leaves with that person. So definitely train a co-administrator. You want to make sure that you don't put all of your knowledge in the mind of just one person. You'll also want to make sure that you develop SOP documentation for doing specific things within the system. So creating those standard operating procedures for how to do certain things with in the system is going to be really important for onboarding new users of the system. You could actually point them to these internal documents for how to do certain things, but also making sure that further on down the line, if anyone needs to reference these items, it creates that business continuity where we don't have so much tribal knowledge, in that all of our tribal knowledge has been written down on this SOP documentation, so that anyone could essentially be trained on how to do certain things within the system, or maybe even administrate the system. So developing SOP documentation is absolutely critical for making sure that the business continuity of the system continues. All right, so those were the 5 items for continuing your CMMS implementation success. I do appreciate everyone's time today. If anyone has any questions, feel free to go ahead and place them into the chat, and I'd be happy to answer any questions for you. I think we may have finished a little bit early today, so I don't mind hanging out at all to answer any questions that you might have about continuing your CMMS implementation in year 2, year 3, or year 4, but any other questions in general about your CMMS.
All right, thank you, Ray.
Yeah.
If you have questions, please, audience, enter those questions in the questions section of your GoToWebinar menu. In the meantime, I do have a few questions for you, Ray. And you're welcome to stop sharing if you want to, and just come on screen with us.
There we go.
Great. Great. Okay, let's see. The first question I have is, how do you separate RCA, etc., in terms of work orders?
Root cause analysis for the work orders?
Yeah.
Okay, so the RCA on the work order, typically that would be a field that we add to the work order, where it really honestly depends on the organization. A lot of customers would do an approach like the 5 whys, where they're using the 5 whys to get to the root cause analysis of the actual issue that they're presenting. My first bit of advice would begin to track the issues. So figuring out common issues that you're running into quite often by adding a field, or it could actually be 2 fields to the work order. So for instance, based on the type of asset that it is, you can actually create in eMate a drill down, and the first level would be the type of asset, and then based on that asset in the second field, you can have a list of issues that you actually commonly run into with that specific asset. My first piece of advice would be to begin tracking those issues. You're probably, 2 things might happen. The first thing that might happen is that it kind of reaffirms what you probably already know. Hey, those compressors are always giving us those issues, or those HVAC units are we're always having this issues. That's typically what would happen. It kind of reaffirms what you already know you're running into, but now you kind of have data to back it up. And then the second thing it could actually show you is issues that you're constantly running into that you had no idea about. So my first piece of advice there would be to add some type of field to your work order based on the asset type that identifies a certain subset of issues that you're running into. And then once you begin to track that on each and every work order, you can begin to create a report that will show you how often you're running into those issues. And then you can begin to figure out the root cause analysis for those issues. And it really should be a team effort as well. I think it's important to include everybody in that analysis to figure out, all right, this month on our compressors, we're constantly running into issues where the machine is running, there's too much pressure in the machine. And then once you identify that as a common issue, then you can begin to figure out exactly what the reason behind it is.
All right, thank you. The questions are coming in. I hope you're ready.
Yep.
Next, does integration with other systems normally take place during the second or third year, or is it available from the start?
It is available from the start. I do sometimes caution customers not to bite off too much more than they can chew in the beginning. Don't forget that you're going to have your hands full just implementing the CMMS system. This is a new system. There's a lot of moving pieces to get this up and running and make it a success. Oftentimes my recommendation is to wait at least a few months to get the foundational elements of the CMMS up and running, and then focus on the integration. So that could be, depending on the organization, 6 months down the line or a year down the line, then you could shift the focus potentially to an integration. Now, there are going to be some customers where they literally cannot use the CMMS unless there's an integration in place, and that's kind of a non-starter. You got to have that starting out. So for instance, maybe they're coming from another CMMS that had an integration already with their ERP system, and it's got to be in there when they start to use a new system. For those types of customers, it definitely is going to be a requirement from day one. But if you can potentially wait, I would say wait until at least a little bit further along down the line, 6 months or a year, or sometimes maybe even year 2 to work on those integrations. That could be a phase 2 type item as opposed to a day 1 item. But it does depend on your situation. If it's got to be day 1, it's got to be day 1. If there's no way around it, we can definitely do it. And that's going to have to be part of the initial project. But if you can wait for it, my suggestion would be to focus on getting the foundational elements of the CMMS up and running, and then focus on the integrations.
All right, thank you. Next, does eMate plan to offer RCFA analysis and preventative maintenance optimization?
I believe so, yeah. So our professional services team, we have talked about offering those services as part of an offering. I can definitely get back to you on that. If you put your name in the chat, I can definitely let you know when something like that will be offered. Most of our offerings would be, they're a little bit more focused on the implementation side of the CMMS. But definitely as part of our professional services team, we are looking to offer stuff like that.
All right, thank you. Next, any tips for changes to CMMS as the size of your team increases? We are going from a team of 1 to a team of several.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. As you're expanding the team, the number one thing that I really try to drive home with customers is to keep things simple. You don't want to overcomplicate the system. The goal of a maintenance technician is not to be in front of the computer all day, and we want to make sure that they got a wrench in their hand as much as possible. They're out on the floor, actually making sure that the equipment is being well maintained and dealing with unplanned breakdowns. As you expand to a larger team, just make sure that you keep the system simple. You're going to have more people that are probably going to be wanting to give input into how the system should be and how the system should be designed. But as your kind of North Star, just try to keep things simple. You're going to take that feedback. Do not overcomplicate the system. As you expand the usage, just make sure that you don't have too many cooks in the kitchen and giving their thoughts on the system. Most of the decisions should be still made by one singular person or a key group of administrators, or let's say the maintenance manager, as opposed to everybody getting their input.
All right, next. Does eMate have some already created PDFs or PowerPoints that would help me to create training for my new users?
We do, absolutely. Definitely the online documentation is a great resource that you could, it is online, so it's right, you can load it right inside of Chrome. It's an online wiki because we're constantly, the software is evolving, right? Because it's cloud-based, there's constantly updates to it. So the online wiki is constantly getting updated with edits and stuff like that. But you can actually go in there and use your browser to print a PDF. Now you may want to maybe change the screenshots a little bit to actually be screenshots of your system, which you can definitely do. That I think goes a long way in catering the training to be a little bit more specific to your system. As we all know, eMate is very configurable, so we want to make sure that the screenshots themselves potentially match your system. But the online wiki is an amazing resource for training documentation, and no issue at all to kind of take that documentation, use that as kind of a starting point for your own training documentation. But my recommendation would be to edit it a little bit specific to your system, but also if you want to take it to that next level, use screenshots of your own system. The screenshots that are in those online documentation articles are typically just the eMate out of the box configuration. You may want to take screenshots of actually your own system.
All right, thank you. And we have more. Does the onboarding cover work order management and the importance of it to get solid reporting that asset managers can base decisions on? So let me say that a little better. Does the onboarding cover work order management and the importance of it to get solid reporting that asset managers can base their decisions on?
So I think maybe you're referring to the eMate onboarding. The eMate potentially the either 8-week or 12-week remote implementation. Absolutely. A key focus of that remote implementation is going to be the work order management component of the system. So they're really going to work with you pretty closely to configure your work order form to really meet the needs of your organization. But really also, at the end of the day, eMate is a CMMS system. It's you can do a lot of great things with it. You can really create an effective PM program. You can create an effective inventory management program. But at the end of the day, it is a work order system, right? So work order management is one of the key parts of onboarding our new customers, and they will absolutely spend a lot of time covering the work order in the system. I remind customers that once you're live with the system, once you're off and running with the system, 90% of your time is likely to be spent inside of the work order module. We have a PM module, we have an inventory module, we have an asset module, but the vast majority of your day-to-day use of the system will be spent on the work order module. So absolutely, that is a large portion of the onboarding of any new customer.
All right, and our next question. What will the hierarchy and levels of administration be when using a CMMS?
There are 4 that come with the system out of the box, and these are kind of really good ones, regardless of whether you're going to be using eMate or another CMMS system. We have an administrator that by default, the administrator gets any permission in the system. So you'll want to make sure that the administrator actually kind of knows what they're doing. They'll have permission to do anything in the system. So you'll have at least one administrator. Other than that, there is a level which in email we call them like a super user. So you're pretty much given the ability to do pretty much anything in the system, typically except deleting records. So that's one thing that we really want to make sure that maybe just the administrator can do that. And that would be deleting records. So that would be a super user level user where they can kind of do everything. And that maybe that would be a good role for that co-administrator that I mentioned. They would be a super user, but not at that admin level. And then the next level would be someone like a manager. So someone like the maintenance manager, where they do need access to, let's say, the PM module in the system, or being able to do certain things, like maybe adding a new asset to the system. That would be more like the manager level, and maybe also fully closing out work orders or jobs like that, or setting up new PM schedules. That would be at the manager level. And then a step below that would actually be the technician level, where pretty much their job is more just focused on the work orders, editing work orders, putting their labor on the work orders, charging their parts out to work orders. They don't really need too much of the administrative functions of the system. That would be the next level. And then the lowest level would probably be read-only access. So that would be the individual can really just view records in the system. They can't really do anything in the system. You kind of dummy-proof it a little bit for them so that they can view records but not actually mess anything up. And funny enough, the read-only access is a lot of times it's actually, I've seen customers mostly give it to senior leadership users in the system, where they want to allow that senior leader to view the system, but they don't want them to really kind of mess things up in the system. So they actually give them that read-only access so that they can view things in the system, view reports, metrics, dashboards, and stuff like that. But not really, they don't really need access to do anything like editing records and stuff like that within the database. So those are the typical levels that I would recommend. Admin, then a super user, then a manager, then a technician, and then lastly, that read-only access.
All right, thank you, Ray. We have more. Let's see, does it have not only VMRS codes, but PCR codes? And then in parentheses, for PCR, it says problem, cause, remedy.
No, typically we do not. The VMRS, I think we do have an email out of the box template that does have those codes in them. We typically like to work with customers one-on-one during the onboarding to figure out exactly what their coding is going to be for their work orders. So it's, and honestly, every business and customer is a little bit different. We do have kind of different email accounts specific to fleet or other types of business or verticals. But usually we like to have the customer conversation with the customer one-on-one to figure out what coding they want to use on their work orders. And then we actually go ahead and set it up in the system for them. We definitely can reference certain industry specific documents to provide a list to customers. Hey, this is a common symptom or cause list for the industry of, let's say, facilities management, or VMRS coding is oftentimes used in the trucking industry. We don't put them in the system without having the conversation with the customer, because even though two customers might be in the same exact industry, they might not exactly do things how another company within that same industry might do it. So we can absolutely set it up it's very easy to set up any type of drop down within the system. But we typically wait during the onboarding to have that conversation with the customer, just to make sure that the coding is going to be exactly what they're looking for.
All right. Let's see, our next question. Does the CMS system have a soft deleting feature and not a hard delete for recovery purposes?
X4, no. Emain X4, no. There is a delete button, and it actually, well, to be honest, when you delete a record in X4, it goes to a repository called remove deleted records, which essentially, think of that as like the trash can on your Windows PC. It goes to this repository, this kind of purgatory, where you then can fully delete it. So yes, I would say in actually both versions of the system, X4 and X5, we do have a soft delete. When you hit that delete button, it actually doesn't fully go away. X5, we don't even call it delete anymore. We've actually moved away from calling it delete. In X5, it's simply called archiving a record. We do not use the terminology delete in X5 because we don't really want customers to delete records for the most part. When a customer asks me, hey, can I delete these records? I usually always propose them, okay, you can, but why? What's the thought process behind deleting these records? If it was just an error, maybe some test records that were created, absolutely you can delete them. But there is a soft delete function in both X4 and X5 that you can use. It's not, delete and it's gone forever. We also keep backups of the system. So if you ever inadvertently delete stuff that you and fully deleted it and you didn't want to, we can absolutely pull a restore of your system so that we can restore those records.
All right, thank you. All right, let's see next. You have VMRS, but can clients build those codes to perform thorough RCA/RCFA or FMEA analysis? And if you need me to read that again, I will.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it all comes down to adding fields to the work order and then populating those fields with the appropriate values. So if you have values that you want to use for those, for instance, like I was saying, for like a certain asset type, if you're constantly running into certain issues, you might want to create a list of those specific issues. And then once you add that to the work order, on every work order based off the asset that's selected on the work order, eMaint can load up those specific issues to it, and then you can make your selections. And then once you start loading all that data onto your work orders and you've begun to enter work orders, let's say for a month or 2 or 3 months, you can begin to pull those issues out onto a report to see, all right, I'm constantly running into this issue, what's going on? And look, I can actually extrapolate a cost for this issue that I'm constantly running into. We've spent this amount in parts on this issue, and I've spent this amount of labor on this issue. We really got to get a handle on this. So we can very easily create those types of lists on your work order in the system. It would be up to you as the customer to actually provide us the data for those lists, but very easily you can add multiple different lists onto the actual work order in the system that would allow you to begin tracking how often you're running into those issues and even what the remedy is for those specific issues. Like you mentioned, you could have a remedy list as well.
All right, next. Can triggers be set based on predictive maintenance for conditions that are not with parameters by utilizing your condition-based monitoring?
Yes, absolutely. So I think you had said without, can you say that for me one more time, Robin?
Sure. Can triggers be set based on predictive maintenance for conditions that are not with parameters by utilizing your condition-based monitoring?
Okay, so I think you said conditions with parameters. So yeah, with our condition-based monitoring module, you can use the system to keep track of readings, and then within the condition monitoring module, create either an upper or lower bound threshold for triggering a work order or an alert within the system. It
And
doesn't necessarily.
what if they, Ray, I'm sorry, there was a correction added. What if they are not within your set of operating parameters?
If they're not with it, so if maybe ask them, are they asking if the reading goes beyond the threshold? Is that what the question is?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, if the reading in the condition monitoring module goes above the upper bound threshold or below the lower bound threshold, and I will note as well, you don't necessarily need to have an both. You can just have an upper or you can just have a lower. I'll just mention that. But yes, if the reading actually goes beyond that threshold, it can either create an alert within the system or even automatically create a work order within the system. So that's one benefit of the condition monitoring module. I will also let you know that, part of a good predictive maintenance program is to get ahead of those issues before the alert comes out or before the work order gets created. You'll want to use the eMate reporting module to begin to view that data. So you could actually create a graph within the system with the upper and lower bound threshold on it, and it's showing your readings. And let's say the reading is constantly getting closer and closer to that upper bound threshold. Even though it didn't cross it and create that alert or that work order, if you see that your reading is slowly getting closer and closer to that upper bound threshold, you kind of have an idea that, hey, something's going on here. Let's get ahead of it. Let's get ahead of this issue before it creates a failure event within the system. So that's another real benefit of the condition-based monitoring module in eMate, in that, yes, it can create an alert, yes, it can create a work order, but let's actually use the eMate reporting module to get eyes on it, and that way we can see if it's trending up. We can figure out the issue before it actually crosses the threshold.
All right. A little more system-wide question. Is the eMate CMMS system, is it SaaS or is there an on-site version?
It is completely web-based.
Okay.
Yep. So
And
completely
then,
cloud. As long as you have a solid internet connection, you will be able to access the system. And we're really big proponents of a cloud-based system. It allows us to easily release new features of the system, constantly, quickly fix if there's ever a bug in the system. Allows us to deploy hot fixes very easily, anything like that. So it's really, we're big proponents of cloud-based software.
our next question, and we have about 13 minutes left, so I've got about 4 more questions and we'll try to get to those.
Okay.
The first one is, does your inventory module allow you to set ROPs to reorder, perform blind counts for cycle counting, and track turn rates?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not familiar with the term ROP. Do you mind chatting that in?
Yeah, our reorder points.
Reorder point. Yes, absolutely. So that's one of the really important things in the inventory module, is that when you set a reorder point, it'll allow you to create reorder reports within the system. Sometimes, I'll be honest with you, customers don't include all that data on the inventory record. They really just want to use eMate, let's say, to keep track of the current on-hand quantities, and they don't really create reorder reports and stuff like that within the system. So it just depends on how much you want to use in the inventory module, but all those things that you mentioned are possible in our inventory reporting module. Cycle counts, creating those inventory reorder reports based off the ROP, all those are possible.
All right, a little more generalized question as far as management of the overall effort. What are some of the most common missteps that you have seen customers make in the later phase or phases of a CMMS implementation?
Good question there. Probably just really using the system as, let's say, a filing cabinet. They're using the system, but they really haven't gotten into any reporting or developing those metrics and KPIs that we talked about a lot today. They're really just using the system as a glorified filing cabinet. So that's probably one of the common missteps I've seen, because at the end of the day, you should be using the system to drive business decisions. And if you're really just using it as a filing cabinet, I see that as almost, you're not getting the full value out of the software. We really want to make sure that you're using the system to drive business decisions, and don't just use it as a database. Really make sure that you're getting those, you're analyzing the data that you're putting into it by creating those metrics and KPIs. So don't sit on the data. You really kind of make use of the data that you're collecting.
And the next one I have is, do you currently today have any CMMS systems in production for any maritime industries?
I did work with a maritime client a few years ago when I was a customer success manager. They were based out of Seattle. So yes, absolutely. I could definitely connect with my team if you want to go ahead and put your information into the chat to maybe connect you with any other clients that are in your industry if you maybe wanted to chat with them. Absolutely, I have worked with clients in the maritime industry.
And this one's similar, somewhat similar to the question we just talked about in not using the full use of your CMMS system. We're heading into the third year of our CMMS implementation. We still don't use most of our system. We use it for work order tracking and requests from our production team. What's the best approach to build out an effective PM program?
Okay, so I will say it's great that you're using it in some capacity. So definitely, as I mentioned, you'll always want to continue to drive adoption in the system, and one of the ways that you can do that is absolutely developing your PM program. The first step I would recommend there is to probably identify your critical assets, so the assets that are most critical to your operation. Identify them and then build out the PM program specifically for those assets. Obviously, you might have lots more assets, but if you wanted to start slowly and build the PM program, kind of an approach that's starting with the most important things first, identify your critical assets and then develop the PMs for those specific critical assets. Both the task for maintaining those assets correctly, so for instance, what are the actual steps of the PMs that I want the technician to perform, and then also how often I want those to be performed. So for instance, this critical asset, do we want to maybe PM it every month, or is it going to be every quarter, or is it going to be every 6 months, or is it going to be every year? Or maybe it's going to be all of those, right? Because a single asset, you can absolutely have multiple PMs on it. You'll want to make sure that you not only develop a good task list or a good list of procedures for how the technician is going to maintain that asset, but you also want to take a look at the frequencies for how often you're maintaining it. And then I would also recommend adjusting as well. A good PM program is one that's constantly living and breathing. You don't just want to set things and forget it, right? You want to take a look at those PMs that you just set up on those critical assets and say, all right, I'm still constantly getting breakdowns on this machine. It's still giving us so many headaches. And you'll want to take a look at the PM to make sure it's actually effective. You'll want to make sure that you maybe adjust the frequency to perhaps do the preventive maintenance more often. Or you might want to take a look at what the technician's actually doing as part of those PMs to make sure that it's actually effective. You want to say, all right, are those 20 steps that that technician is doing as part of that quarterly PM, is it actually doing anything? Because I'm constantly still getting breakdowns. So a good PM program is one that's constantly evolving and constantly changing. And you'll want to use the CMMS to really pull data out of the system to say, all right, I set up PMs on these 20 assets. Let me pull a report out of the database to see am I still constantly getting breakdowns for these machines, or is it actually improving? After I tweak that PM, the amount of downtime for that asset is reduced drastically. That to me would lead to that would indicate an improvement. You also want to take into account, it happens quite often, sometimes customers over PM the equipment. So conversely, under PM could potentially create a lot of unplanned downtime or a lot of failures on that piece of equipment. On the flip side, you don't want to over PM a piece of equipment, because then you're wasting labor and potentially parts as part of over PMing that piece of equipment. So a good starting off, if you really want to start with kind of building a new PM program, identify your critical assets, and I would say target them, then build out an effective task for your actual PM, so the list of steps that the technician is going to be performing, and then decide on your frequencies for how often you want those PMs to be performed, and then adjust from there. You don't really, it's not set it and forget it, adjust as time goes on. And I would say at least quarterly, sit down with your team and take a look at your PMs to say, hey, let's do a PM effective analysis and say, are these actually being effective, or is it reducing downtime, or is, for whatever reason, is downtime still increasing even though we're PMing this machine? Based on that information that you can now pull from the CMMS, you'll be able to make adjustments to your PMs.
Well, thank you so much, Ray. We really appreciate your expertise, and you're taking the time to answer some of these great questions that we've got gotten today. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate.
Everyone, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we really appreciate your time. We appreciate our participants' time today. Just as a quick FYI for our participants, the recording of this event will be available on our Fluke YouTube channel within the next week. You can also find all of the previously recorded best practices Fluke webinars on our YouTube channel. An email will go out to all registered participants when that is available. And when you leave today's meeting, a brief survey will pop up. Please take a moment to answer the survey and let us know what topics you're interested in hearing about so that we can line up future experts such as Ray to give us information in a quick and timely manner. Thank you again, everyone, for joining today. Ray, thank you so much for your time, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.